Krill stepped out of the spaceship's control room, his eyes wide with curiosity, yet filled with a deep sense of unease. Just hours earlier, he had been filled with pride about the mission he had been assigned: to study the human species, one of the most mysterious and enigmatic life forms in the entire universe. But the moment he entered the crew's quarters, everything he had imagined began to unravel. The atmosphere within the spaceship shifted dramatically. It wasn't the usual quiet of space. It was an eerie silence, so profound that Krill could almost hear his own breath. From the outside, the human ship appeared massive, with its glowing lights and long, seemingly endless corridors. But now, as Krill ventured deeper into the crew's sleeping quarters, a strange sensation began to build inside him. The crew members, whom he had imagined as vibrant, strange, but full of life, now lay motionless, not moving an inch. Their eyes were closed, their bodies perfectly still, their hands relaxed at their sides, with no sign of life whatsoever. They appeared to be in deep sleep, but this was no ordinary slumber Krill had ever known. The stillness was too thick, too unnerving, as if time itself had stopped. In the dim light of the room, the advanced monitoring equipment began to buzz, sending out signals. The physiological displays flickered to life, streaming data at an incredible pace. Krill reached out and lightly swiped across the control panel, a delicate touch to examine the information that was now illuminating the screens. The body temperature readings were normal. There was no sign of hypothermia or any physical trauma. Yet, other readings made him pause. The heart rates of the crew were steadily decreasing, almost to the point of non-existence. Their brainwaves slowed dramatically, with no significant fluctuation. These readings should have triggered alarms, indicating that they were in critical danger, or worse, that they were slowly dying. An overwhelming sense of anxiety began to build in Krill's chest. He suspected that some unknown agent had affected the crew, rendering them in this state. But within the vast and cold confines of the spaceship, there was no clear indication of external damage or any outside influence. No wounds, no physical responses from the body, just the chilling silence enveloping everything. Tension flooded Krill's mind. As a space doctor, he had dealt with emergencies before, but he had never encountered anything like this. What he was witnessing could not be explained by any medical theories he had studied. Equipped with the most advanced devices to monitor human physiology, Krill still could not find the answer. He pushed the door open wider and stepped into the vast sleeping quarters where the crew lay. Every step he took echoed in the unnerving silence. He could not fathom why these beings, these humans, who were so vibrant, so full of energy and complexity, could be frozen in such a completely lifeless state. This bizarre sensation only intensified his fear, his heart tightening. It wasn't fear of death, but rather a baffling confusion he couldn't explain. It felt as though he was standing inside a phenomenon beyond his comprehension. How could these creatures lie here, motionless and unresponsive, when he knew that they were alive, capable of thinking, moving? In the vastness of this space, Krill suddenly felt small, insignificant, like a speck of dust lost in the infinite void. His journey of exploration seemed to be heading down an unpredictable path, and he didn't know whether he would find the answers he sought. Krill stood frozen in front of the control panel, the blinking blue lights reflecting off his face, making his eyes appear sharp and filled with concern. The crew's physiological readings had appeared on the screen, but the numbers before him caused him to pause in confusion. The heart rate, an essential indicator of life, was slowly dropping with each passing second. The numbers on the screen barely moved, as if the hearts of these people were coming to a halt. Starting at 60 beats per minute, it dropped to 50, then 40, then 30. An unexplained decline, as if time itself had stopped flowing. The body temperature of the crew was also dropping unnaturally. From a normal human temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, it now fell to 30 degrees Celsius, then 28 degrees Celsius, then 25 degrees Celsius, and still continued to decrease. A clear sign of hypothermia, but with no external cause, no radiation, no freezing cold of space surrounding them. These numbers couldn't be explained by any of the basic scientific theories Krill had learned. He looked at the screen again, struggling to maintain his calm while realizing that something was terribly wrong. Their brainwaves had also dipped to an unusually low level. Instead of the rhythmic brain activity typical of a waking state, they became slow and erratic, with unstable frequencies. Some brainwave signals even disappeared entirely, leaving only simple lines, as if their brains were shutting off, or entering a state Krill had never encountered in his entire career. This first discovery only deepened Krill's anxiety. His mind spun with the flood of data, unable to make sense of these physiological anomalies. These humans weren't moving, they showed no signs of awareness. Their eyes were tightly shut, their faces expressionless, as if they were in a state of complete stasis. Krill raised his hand to his forehead, trying to steady himself, but the worry only intensified. Krill couldn't just continue staring at the control panels. He decided he had to investigate further by searching for the crew directly, hoping to find some sign that could explain this strange condition. He walked down the darkened, silent hallway of the spaceship, where everything felt unusually still. His footsteps seemed to echo loudly in the empty space, as though reverberating in an endless void. Reaching the crew's sleeping quarters, Krill entered and opened the door to a sleeping room. What he saw was beyond imagination. The crew members lay motionless, their bodies lifeless with no signs of life, but all showing a strange change. Some of them had a noticeable reduction in metabolic rate. Their breathing was weak, as if they were in a deep sleep from which they couldn't awaken. But not all of them appeared to be sleeping. Some had skin so pale, it was almost colorless, as if they were slowly losing their life force. Their body temperature had dropped to an unimaginable degree. Krill reached out and touched the skin of one of them, feeling the coldness, colder than anything he had ever felt in space. This chill wasn't from the environment around them. It was a deep, internal coldness coming from within their bodies. Everything was still, and nothing seemed to be able to change this. Entering another room, Krill encountered an even stranger sight. One of the crew members appeared to be floating. They weren't lying on the bed, but seemed to hover in space, as if there were no gravity. Their body was motionless, yet all the surrounding equipment appeared to be functioning normally. A strange feeling, not entirely fear nor surprise, washed over Krill, but he couldn't let time pass without understanding what was happening. After thoroughly examining the physiological changes, Krill felt as though he was falling into a maze with no exit. Not only the physiological readings, but the entire state of the crew's bodies seemed to have frozen. He found signs of an incredibly strange decline. Their metabolic rate had plummeted, as though their bodies had no energy left to sustain life. Their skin had turned pale and cold, their eyes tightly shut, showing no signs of awakening. Krill's anxiety grew stronger. He had to contact the captain and try to find an explanation for this unexplainable condition. But when he tried to make contact, there was no response. The spaceship was completely silent, not a sound to be heard. He felt as if he were lost in an infinite space, where everything seemed to have come to a halt. At this point, Krill's mind was a mix of confusion and panic. He couldn't explain these phenomena. Were they in some sort of death-like state? Or was there something else happening that he couldn't fully understand? Would he find the answers before it was too late? The silence aboard the spaceship grew heavier than ever before. Krill stood frozen before the physiological monitoring screens, his hands trembling as he gently touched the control panels. The numbers continued to shift, like an ominous sign that couldn't be ignored. He checked again and again, desperately trying to find something that could explain the strange phenomenon unfolding before him. But the results remained cold and incomprehensible, as if the universe itself were trapping him in an enigma he couldn't solve. Everywhere on the ship, the crew lay motionless. The physiological signs weren't just limited to one individual. They were the same across the entire crew, in a manner that was terrifyingly uniform. Their body temperature, a crucial indicator of health, continued to drop below normal levels. A reading from 37 degrees Celsius, a typical human body temperature, slowly descended to 30 degrees Celsius, then 28 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Celsius, 26 degrees Celsius. Krill could feel a chill, not just from the equipment, but emanating from the crew members themselves. Their heart rate, instead of maintaining its usual steady rhythm, slowed with each passing second. Initially, their heart rates hovered around 40 to 50 beats per minute, a level that could be considered normal for a deep rest. But then, the numbers continued to drop. 40, 30, 20, and eventually, 10 beats per minute. A sparse, faint beat, so weak that it was almost impossible to detect with the naked eye. The bodies remained still, unresponsive to the environment around them, as if all of their muscles had been frozen and could no longer move. These humans didn't seem to be resting at all. It was as though something was controlling them. Something was holding them in a state that Krill couldn't comprehend. A deep sense of fear began to stir in his chest, as if with each passing minute, they were slipping closer to an inevitable death, one that he could not understand. Unable to stand idly by, Krill decided to conduct further tests using the advanced analysis equipment he had brought. He placed his hands on the monitoring devices, activating the physiological scanning tools to verify the crew's condition. He couldn't just stand there, watching as these strange physiological signs became more and more pronounced. He moved slowly, adjusting the devices to check for factors like blood pressure, respiration rate, blood oxygen levels, and especially body temperature. At this point, the analysis equipment began to produce irrefutable results. The crew's bodies were slowly slipping away from life, but there were no signs of external injury, no wounds, no signs of disease. There were no visible injuries, no foreign objects invading their bodies. Everything seemed pristine, as though they had entered a state of suspended animation. One particular reading caught Krill's attention: metabolic rate. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the numbers indicating that their metabolic rates had dropped to dangerously low levels, nearly non-existent. What Krill knew was that when the human body nears death, all metabolic processes cease. Yet, right now, there was no clear indication of death, but the bodies were nearing a state that Krill had never encountered throughout his career. Krill's heart sank under a weight that was almost impossible to describe. Every number, every reading on the screen only made him feel more lost. He tried to adjust the devices, recheck the data, but it didn't change. Why was there no clear sign of external damage? Why was the body able to do this, lowering its body temperature and heart rate to alarming levels without any apparent reason? He sighed and looked around the ship, the dim light from the control panels casting faint shadows across his face. His mind swirled with countless theories. Could there be some kind of foreign toxin affecting the crew? Or perhaps some alien virus he had never encountered before, one that could slow down all physiological processes without causing any physical harm? Was there something in space, some unseen factor, that was causing the crew to die slowly? Krill felt his patience wearing thin as he couldn't make sense of what was happening. The anxiety spread through his body, from his mind to his hands, as he realized that everything he had learned, every piece of medical knowledge about human physiology, might not be enough to solve this mystery. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the screen, his heart filled with unasked questions. Could he save them? Or was he merely witnessing the end of a mystery that the universe didn't want to reveal? Krill couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. The sense of confusion and fear continued to swell within him, like a giant wave threatening to consume all his logic. He returned to the sleeping quarters once more, trying to find any sign that could prove this wasn't some misunderstanding. The numbers on the screen, the physiological readings, remained unchanged, body temperature dropping to dangerous levels, heartbeats almost non-existent, signs of life fading away. Those bodies lay still, unmoving, unresponsive. He moved through the sleeping rooms, but nothing had changed. The crew members seemed to have stopped breathing, stopped living. All Krill could feel was the terrifying silence. Though he knew that silence was normal in space, this time it felt as if he was standing at the edge of a precipice, unable to comprehend what was happening. As Krill began to lose all hope, he decided to seek out the captain, the one person who might understand what was going on. He was granted access to the command room and quickly made his way to the captain's quarters. When he entered, the captain was seated at the control desk, holding a warm cup of coffee, the soft light from the screens casting a reflection on his face. Krill couldn't hide the confusion in his eyes. "Captain, what's happening to the crew?" Krill asked, his voice betraying his concern. The captain looked up, offering Krill a small smile. "Ah, Krill, I guess you're confused by all of this, aren't you?" Krill nodded, but his mind was still swirling with questions. "I don't understand. They're all motionless, as if they're dead." The captain let out a quiet sigh, leaning back in his chair, his eyes staring off into the distance, through the window where the faint light of the stars shone down. I know what you're thinking. Yes, it looks like death, but it's not. They're not dead. It's just human sleep. Krill stood frozen, unable to believe what the captain had just said. He listened intently as his previous assumptions began to shatter like fragments in his mind. The captain continued, his tone calm but assured. Sleep is a very important physiological process for us. During sleep, the human body is actually recovering. The brain, the internal organs, everything needs time to regenerate energy and repair the small damage that accumulates throughout the day. Moreover, sleep helps strengthen our memory and supports our immune system. The captain stood and walked over to the control panel, pointing to a section of the screen. When humans sleep, our bodies actually slow down to conserve energy, while the brain takes in and processes information, repairing cellular damage that we can't perceive while awake. It's a life-sustaining process. Krill sat down in a chair nearby, his eyes wide, trying to comprehend everything the captain had just explained. It felt as if the world around him had suddenly been turned upside down, and everything he had imagined about death now seemed wrong. The captain continued, as though explaining something obvious. Sleep is not death. Sleep is when the body temporarily shuts down to recover, but it's an essential part of life. If we don't sleep, we can't continue living, because every system in our body needs rest to function properly. At this moment, Krill felt a wave of embarrassment and confusion. He sat there in the captain's quarters, his mind racing with a million questions. Everything he thought he knew about death, about decay, was now completely turned upside down. He realized that the death he had imagined while observing the crew was actually just part of a natural life cycle he had never understood. A strange feeling welled up inside him, a sense of awe at the miraculous harmony between life and death that he had never witnessed in any other species. Humans not only survived, but they had the ability to come back to life every night, to regenerate and recover in a way no other species could. He pursed his lips, unable to put into words the thoughts that were shattering in his mind. So everything I've seen is sleep? How can I understand this, Captain? It's so different from anything I've known. The captain smiled, his gaze full of understanding. That's right, Krill. Human sleep is a miracle, and I understand you've never seen it in other species. But that's what makes us special. In these moments of sleep, humans don't just recover their bodies. They enhance their endurance, adapt, and overcome the challenges the world throws at them. Krill was still deep in thought, but gradually, he felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the end, but rather a new beginning, a never-ending cycle between life and rest. He started to realize that not everything could be explained immediately. Sometimes, the strangest things were the most beautiful. Now, Krill was no longer confused, though his understanding of human sleep was still incomplete. But at least he had come to realize that in this universe, there are things that logic can't easily grasp. And that was the very miracle he would continue to explore. Krill stood before the control panels, his eyes still alight with curiosity, but his mind heavy with an unexplainable sense of unease. The data from his recent experiments continued to flood the screens around him. The numbers on body temperature, heart rate, and brain waves were clearly displayed, but each one revealed a new, unexplainable mystery he couldn't quite grasp. The human body seemed to possess a healing mechanism that Krill could not fully comprehend, a process that could only be activated during sleep, allowing them to regenerate energy and restore life. Yet, within these very readings, Krill sensed something unsettling. Although humans could survive and regenerate every night through sleep, this wasn't just a simple restorative process. It seemed to be something deeper, something the universe itself might not have fully prepared for. Could this sleep process have far-reaching consequences for life in the universe? Krill wondered as his fingers lightly skimmed over the control panels, feeling the constant flow of data pass through his fingertips. If humans could overcome death every night, could this be an evolution that pushes beyond any known limits? Could they maintain life forever through this sleep? What would happen if this process went too far, beyond the control of humanity itself? Human sleep might be a miraculous recovery mechanism, but it also posed a much larger question. Could eternal existence lead to unforeseen consequences? If humans could sustain life through sleep, would they be trapped in a never-ending cycle of life and death? Would they become creatures that live forever, but never evolve beyond their current state? This ability to regenerate seemed like a great gift, but Krill couldn't shake the concern about its long-term consequences. Would humans truly be prepared to face the consequences of this regenerative power, or would it lead them down a path into an unpredictable future? Like a double-edged sword, this eternal life could become a burden rather than a blessing. Krill couldn't help but wonder whether the consequences of sleep, this constant cycle of regeneration, would have deep impacts on the evolution of humanity. He gazed at the crew, lying asleep in their quarters, their eyes shut but their bodies still alive. He wondered if they were aware of the miraculous ability they possessed. Did they ever question the potential risks of this cycle? Or did they simply accept sleep as an inseparable part of their existence? Krill felt a deep admiration for humans. They could recover, change, and endure forever, despite the challenges the universe threw at them. But at the same time, he couldn't stop worrying about the potential consequences. Was this regenerative power truly good for them in the long term? Or would there be a limit that they wouldn't recognize until it was too late? Although Krill didn't have the answers yet, he felt an odd belief in this ability of humanity to endure. Perhaps they didn't understand everything that was happening within their bodies, but it was the very power of this recovery that made them stronger than any other species in the universe. Krill continued to observe the physiological data on the screens, but in his heart, the big questions still had no answers. Humans, with their miraculous ability to regenerate, still held a secret that even the universe could not fully understand. And in the silence of the vast expanse of space, Krill felt as though he stood between two worlds, one of understanding and the other full of unanswered questions, opening a new door, one full of wonder, but also fraught with danger. Is human sleep salvation, or just the first step in an uncontrollable cycle?